Welcome to the Politics Inc. podcast, where we explore the world of politics through the lens and perspective of editorial cartoonists. My guest today is an award-winning editorial cartoonist, illustrator, and children's book author. And if the prolific volume of work he created wasn't enough, in his spare time, he's the vice president of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. Please welcome Mr. Kevin Necessary. Kevin, thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Well, good. I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. I know we've been playing back and forth, and I'm so glad we could finally get some time to talk. Been a fan of your work for a while, and your style especially is just, it's so, I don't know, you hit this good balance with the work you do of how your characters are formed and what they look like, and whether you're doing a caricature of a politician or you're just doing what I always call the average Joe or Jane. Your style and your look has such a unique balance where it doesn't look too cartoony and it doesn't look like a caricature. So take me through how you got started, what inspired you to get started, and who was kind of your influence when you got going?
I'll start with my influence first because I got very, very lucky. So I'm from Cincinnati. I still live in Cincinnati. Cincinnati had, in my estimation, the best editorial cartoonist of all time. It was Jim Borgman. And he was the cartoonist at the Cincinnati Enquirer from 1977 to 2008. So I grew up with him. I grew up seeing his work almost every day. The funny thing is, like, Jim once told me that he doesn't think that anyone in Cincinnati, remembers him. And everybody remembers him. Even people who probably weren't reading the news in 2008 when he left still know who he is. And it's, his footprints are just around the city everywhere. And so, I was fortunate to have that influence here. And, I also, was born in 79. So, I got into like Star Wars when I was a kid, and my parents also gave me a Star Wars art book that had all of the the production drawings. And so at this very early age, I just kind of like grokked what art was, and every kid likes drawing, so it just got me into drawing. And when I was in high school, I again lucked out quite a bit because we had a great journalism program in our high school, and they needed an editorial cartoonist. So I didn't know anything about journalism. I just decided, why not? Because it's a way to get my stuff in print. And that's kind of how I started. What was great was able to have the resource of Jim Borgman in town. I could send him letters and send him my art. Sometimes I would show up in his office at the Cincinnati Enquirer, just waiting around for him to come back from lunch. And,
That's great. Wow.
So so it was, that's how I got it started. That's my villain origin story.
Villain origin story. No, that's great. Yeah, Jim Borgman, I agree, is on the kind of Mount Rushmore of political cartoonists. Not only the work he did for the Enquirer, but even with the comic Zits that he helped illustrate. And again, I think just his style is so one of one. There's no one really like him. To this day, and Zits and his comics, I think, still have such a place in my heart. But even my daughter loves the collection of Zits and loves his style too, because I don't know if he used a quill pen or a sable brush, but he had this perfect, and again, I could see it influencing your work, this perfect line work of like thin to thick, back to thin again, and just the right amount of I'll call it the hump of the back of the characters. Just so clean and so on it every time. And then a little, detail brush to go in for cross-hatching or for shadowing. So I could see how he's had a huge influence on your work. And I could see the, having that resource in a city, growing up with him your whole life. What was it like when you actually met him? Was there a moment where you felt like, oh, the baton has been passed to me?
So I first met him when I was in high school, and like I said, I don't even remember why we were in downtown Cincinnati, because I was in this, grew up in the suburbs. I just got into my head like, oh, I'm gonna walk into the Enquirer, and he's gonna be there in his office. I'm just gonna say hi, and I was able to walk into the Enquirer, and I sat down in his office, and he was getting lunch, and I waited about half an hour for him to come back, and just I think surprised the hell out of him. But I left that day with like a packet of um, like resources for cartooning, and things that he would give other young cartoonists. Um, he encouraged me to keep writing him and sending him my stuff, and and I did. What's funny is like in like the span of like 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years, I get into college. I've matured a little bit more, not much more because I'm a cartoonist. I'm never going to mature. But I got an internship at the Inquirer doing page design with the feature section, and I avoided Jim like the plague. I was so embarrassed by being that fanboy kid, and inside I still was that fanboy. So I'm all summer, and it was my last week there. I was in the elevator, going to the parking garage, and he steps in the elevator with me, and I am just shrinking back into the corner, avoiding eye contact. And he looks over and he's like, "Aren't you the kid who used to show up in my office all the time?" And I mean, and that's but I mean, he's just the nicest guy. He's always been very supportive of my career, of of what I wanted to do. He he became a cheerleader. And so when I began working at the Inquirer in the mid to late 2000s, um, you know I again, even though I was in my 30s, I would still go and show him my artwork and get his advice. He got me connected with the illustration community in Cincinnati. And when he retired in 2008, I was asked to do his goodbye caricature, and such a a mind-blowing honor. I stayed up every night for a week. I was in I was in a new relationship at the time. We're now married, but my now wife and girlfriend had no idea what I was like, trying to like solve a trying to like obsess over a piece of artwork, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. When I was like, I cracked it, and I went into the bedroom, and I just was like jumping and yelling, and she's like, what the hell is this?
Why then she knew what she was getting into, of like the life that she was
getting into,
signing up for. That's great.
And that day, or that like the day of his actual retirement, he was asked to make a speech at the Inquirer, and he said that he hoped that cartooning would continue there. And he pointed at the back of the room, and I, like everyone else, looked behind me, and I was looking at a wall. And when I turned back, everyone was looking at me, which was one of the greatest feelings of joy and dread and anxiety. and then I got laid off 6 months later.
But what a moment, though, to meet your hero and have him pass the torch, and to feel the weight of it. And then sadly, as you and so many editorial cartoonists on staff have felt it, papers just aren't what they used to be. And that's like the first thing at the bottom of their get rid of list that they circle and say, well, we don't really need a political cartoonist anymore. Who needs that anymore?
Yeah. And I got lucky again, because in 2014, we had a TV station here in town that had just kind of like sucked up a bunch of former newspaper reporters and copy editors, and they were trying to do a digital newsroom. And I fell onto their radar, and I became their cartoonist. And so for a good 10 years, I've been Cincinnati's editorial cartoonist. I did make the switch to the Inquirer eventually, and got to do that. And so, I'm no longer doing local cartoons. Unfortunately, I miss it all the time, because I really do believe in the mission of local editorial cartooning. And I hope to do that again someday, somehow. I'm just lucky that I got those 10 years.
Yeah. Oh man. No, it seems like when you said that, it does kind of give a heart pain of having a local pulse on what's going on in your community, and having a representation of an editorial cartoonist explaining or interpreting those kind of moments. I'll say it's easy, air quotes, from a national level, especially with the political theater going on here in
Yeah.
2024, to say, yeah, I could do, here's a Trump, here's a Biden, here's Putin, here's Ukraine. But a local, I have to say, it is a tougher nut to crack of, oh, you've got to, it's not the easy 1-2 punch of a national one that kind of writes itself because of the theater we're in. But a local is, you really need to have a strong point of view. You really need to have, do your homework, do your research, and understand both sides of the issue. So before you bring it into the stage of parody or fun or insight, that you're not stepping in it. But I will say that it is something nice that I feel like has been lost more so than ever. And I'd love to see the resurgence of a local political movement for a lot of editorial cartoonists.
Oh, me too. And I looked at myself as a mirror on the community. Because it allowed me to really take part in my community and be and to try to contribute to the best of my ability. And again, I had such a wonderful role model, with that in Jim, because his cartoons weren't, especially his local cartoons. I mean, he would go after the local politicians or the police or whomever had the power and needed to be knocked down a little bit and to amplify the voice of the common people. But he also did so many local cartoons that were just kind of a reflection on the moment. So whether it was talking about the Reds or the Bengals or the weather or the local environment or just anything that captured a moment and captured a feeling with what we do. And there were times here, a lot of it was actually tragic events. We had a mass shooting at a place called Fountain Square, which is like the spiritual heart of downtown Cincinnati. And I did a cartoon that day of the statue that's on top of the fountain. It's called the Genius of Water. It's one of our symbols here in Cincinnati. And I did this cartoon of the statue crying, and that's all I needed to do. But I had to say something because we were all feeling it. And even my editor, like that day was actually my grandmother's funeral. So I'm in a suit and tie, and I just rush upstairs and knock out a cartoon in about 45 minutes. And my editor's like, I thought you were supposed to be off today. And there were other times, like that are great. When the Bengals started getting good and going to the Super Bowl, and I started doing Bengals cartoons, it became something that I could do and reflect how we were feeling. I miss it. I miss it terribly. And I think you're right. I think it would be great to see a resurgence in local cartoons, because it is harder. It's a much harder thing to do than national cartoons.
Yeah. No, and I think one example of yours that I loved was Monday Night Football. Bills are in town. Injury happens on the field, and you quickly respond with both the mascots kneeling for the player on the Bills, Darren Hamlin. I can't remember his name. Damar Hamlin. Sorry. So you created a cartoon of both the mascots kneeling for Damar Hamlin, but then you use that as a catalyst to help him, and you sold, I think it was, you helped raise money by selling shirts of the illustration.
Yeah. I partnered with a local company here called Cincy Shirts, who had reached out to me, and they asked if they could use that cartoon on a bunch of apparel, and they were able to raise $70,000 for the Damar Hamlin Foundation to buy toys for underprivileged kids.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that just, I mean, that was just one of the best things. I mean, and it was very tragic that Damar, suffered this, and thankfully, medics and then the staff at the University of Cincinnati Hospital were able to help him. But we were able to do something. We were able to use local cartooning for good, and I loved doing that. It's not just about.
It's such a great moment.
It's not. yeah, it's not just about making fun of politicians. It's not just the horse race. It's actually making a difference in
Yeah.
your community and maybe even someone else's community.
Hmm. No, it's great to see that kind of convergence happen of what you do, what you love happen with going to take something tragic, something that, no one wants to see, or something that happens both for the shooting in Fountain Square or even the game on Monday night with Damar Hamlin, and use your purpose, use your tools. And again, life just kind of equips you with all the time and effort and sweat, blood, and ink you put into everything for these moments to happen that just feel like a natural course for you to take. And it's amazing when you can put your gifts and your purpose into something and to see it take new life on like that.
Yeah. Well, how did you get
So I
started?
would love to hear. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I,
I'm
I
curious. Yeah, I want
appreciate
to
the
know.
question on that. Yeah, a very similar story. We had a two-time Pulitzer Prize cartoonist, Mike Keefe, for the Denver Post here in town. And same thing, we had, I will say, three really good political cartoonists: Mike Keefe, Drew Litton, who only does sports and sometimes dabbles in political work, and then Ed Stein. But in high school, same thing. I went down to the Denver Post on a Friday, did an interview with him, asked him questions. I'm sure I was, just a snot-nosed kid, looking gangly and smelly. But asked him a lot of questions, really wanted to see the process. I found a book when I was in elementary school of the best editorial cartoonists of like 1970. It was like an older book. And I just remember just falling in love with the the style of this thick black line and the talk bubbles and these caricatures of presidents in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So
Yeah.
I had always been kind of enthralled with the process. And when I met Mike Keefe, I remember, it was a Friday. He showed me his process. He had an idea. He penciled it out. He took his ink out and he did it, made a copy. And I remember he and he was like, "Hey, best of luck to a fellow cartoonist." And I was like, "Oh, no way! This is amazing!" And it was about George Bush Sr. I remember like throwing up in Japan, and he's like, this is gonna run on Sunday, and this is like pre-internet. So I was like, "What? This is gonna be in the paper on Sunday?" So I just remember having this piece of paper with a copy of something that was like, this is a sneak peek of what the rest of the world sees. So it just felt like a great moment for me of validation of this is great to see that someone here in this little cubicle in a building in my city could do something on a national or international level. And when he won his Pulitzer Prize, he's won two. Again, it was like a great thing for the whole, I'll call it Post or the city to celebrate of, wow, we have someone like that here. And not to say the end reward was everything, but I think just the level of magnitude that you could do from this is what a cartoon has the power to do, is to influence and change and make people think. It really stuck with me. And so from there, there's a little paper out in Aurora, Colorado here that I would just do free work for. I just started sending them work of like, hey, and I look back and it's very cringy work. you know, I'm very surprised they even said yes, but thank you to Jack Bacon, the editor, and Dave Perry, the now editor, because they could have easily laughed me out the door, but they're like, yeah, we don't have one. So yeah, just send it in. So I would put it under the door every Sunday night for a Wednesday print. And that kind of led to other things. And now same kind of thing. I sent some cartoons over to the Colorado Sun, a local paper here that's very all about Colorado politics. And same kind of thing. I met with both the editors, and it was one of those things. It was just like a great relationship. Met them both for coffee. Told them what I would love to do, and so I do two times a month. I send over cartoons and kind of work with them, and yeah, it's amazing, and it still feels like I'm getting away with something. I don't know why.
Yeah. It that's that feels like very similar, like that feeling of like, I can't believe I just get to sit around and draw goofy characters, and I mean
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
my job, and I mean, yeah, you feel like you're getting away with something, and yeah, and and that and when you were talking about Keith, calling you a fellow cartoonist, that is such a
Yeah.
monumental moment. I mean, I've got a card from like 1996, here in my office of that Borgman's like, this is what a good cartoonist is supposed to be doing, and you're doing it. I'm like, blew my mind back in that day. And it's such
Yeah.
a foundational thing. And it sounds like you had that moment too.
Yes,
Um,
yes. And I think that's just it. And so, yeah, it's the validation, because part of the impetus of this podcast was, wow, finding editorial cartoonists is looking for a Bigfoot on the back of a unicorn these days, where we used to have, or there used to be many people with this title, this job, like globally and
yeah.
locally, but they're becoming rarer and rarer. So I'm trying to capture stories, capture this kind of lightning in a bottle moment for a lot of cartoonists who are out there doing it, such as yourself, because I do feel like it's a lost art. And I feel
Yeah.
like as we continue to progress, and anyone and everyone has a voice, and anyone and everyone can be a troll online. To your point, we're actually a mirror of what's going on in society, and kind of not knocking down people, but letting the common person know, hey, this is a representation of how we see things, whether you agree with it or not. But just to help deconstruct the craziness of politics in America and globally, because it is
Yeah.
powerful. And I think people love to see that idea of this person on a pedestal brought down to their level, because again, most politicians work for us, not the other way around.
Even though they think that we work for them.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. But
Yes.
I not to jump ahead too much, but I remember when I
Yeah.
first went to my very first AAEC convention back in 2016. And I mean, I didn't know anyone, and but I remember like being there and having this badge, and people
Mm.
coming up to me, and I would recognize them. I would know their names, and they had no idea who I
Yeah.
was. And but I was like, oh my god, I found my tribe. I found my people. And I would stay up till 3, 4 in the morning every night, just vibing and talking about politics and cartooning, uh, and just trying to like soak up this community that I didn't even really know was out there. Um, and
Yeah.
I do think that there are other people who are out there who probably are doing this kind of work, or doing putting political statements or opinion into their artwork, even if they may not be editorial cartoonists, but in a sense they are. And they might
Yeah.
not have the language for what it is that they're doing, or to know that we're
Mm.
out here. And I think it's very important that we try to find these people, and that like people like us, we connect, and that and that you're out here, actively seeking people to talk to and to talk with, and to light a little bit more of a spark under what we do.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
No, thank you. And I think that's just it. It dawned on me heading into this year that we are becoming more and more of an oddity and rarity in this world. And the good news is, once I started exploring who's doing what, and associations like the AAEC, I feel like there's a good heartbeat. And as you said, a tribe of people still doing it. I think it's just that of like talking to the people who are these like keepers of the flame of what we do. Because you're right, the way we express it is, sometimes digitally, ink, pencil. It has to be in a paper. But you see it transforming in different ways through society, whether it's graffiti or whether it's a meme of something that's funny that's happened, that someone takes a photo of a politician and writes, in the meme font over it. I'm like, oh, that's a great creative expression of a political, statement or movement. Like that's like a cartoonist or an editorial or political cartoonist in a way, without being a quote unquote cartoonist, but they're still expressing the same idea that you or
Mhm.
I or someone else could sit there and draw and redraw for, till 2 or 3 in the morning to get the character
Yeah.
just right. So I love how the expression of, if you're upset about something or you're making fun of something, it feels like it's democratized a lot. But I think what we do of dipping a pen in the inkwell, it's that art form that I feel like is getting lost along the way too. And this, as you said, tribe of people, of who we are and what we do, is becoming fewer and fewer. I guess this is a good transition into the AAEC. You went to that conference, you said.
Mhm.
What led you to now get into being, the vice president? How did you get from that one meeting where you found your tribe into where you are today?
I was the only adult in the room at one point. So Yeah, so back in late 2021, I mean, during the height of the pandemic, the AAEC went totally digital with its convention, and the president at the time, Jen Sorensen, asked me to be on a Zoom panel. And I don't know what it was that got her attention, but a few weeks later, she calls me up and asked me to be president of the AAEC because she felt like she needed to step down.
Wow.
And I said no because I was a nobody. I'd been in the organization for 5 years. You have, I mean, unfortunately, it is a dwindling organization, but you have multiple Pulitzer winners, people who have won multiple Pulitzers, and many of those people and people who've done this work and who've volunteered to be president or on the board. And here I was, just I'm a nobody. But for some reason, she asked me to do it, and I had a lot of conversations with people with that, and it always started off with, "Who are you again?"
Yeah.
Um,
And you're like further
like,
validation that maybe I'm not ready for this role.
yeah, and this is absolutely no slight on him because he had every reason to ask me this. But I very distinctly remember Rob Rogers from
Mm.
who was formerly the Pittsburgh Gazette's cartoonist who famously got fired for making fun of Trump. I remember getting a phone call from him, and he was on the nominating board. And he's like, "Who are you, and why are you going to be our president?" And
Oh man.
so I stepped in not really knowing what to expect. Because
Hmm.
even in early 22, we didn't know if we were going to be in person that year. We didn't know if it was going to be another Zoom thing for the convention. That's one of the big things that a president has to do. I felt like it was a very transitional, just kind of a caretaker. I was a warm body. It ended up being a lot of work for that one year. Because we did have an in-person convention, we were able to tack it on to another comic convention that happens in Columbus, Ohio, and we were able to partner with them. It was but all of a sudden I found myself with a seat at the table,
Yeah.
and what I realized was I really enjoyed. I don't know if I enjoyed being the leader, but I enjoyed having a seat at the table. I enjoyed being able to talk with my fellow cartoonists. I enjoyed talking about what our future might be and where we might
Mm.
go, and that that invested me by jumping into the deep end of the pool. So once that year, once we were, everything was kind of coming to a close, the incoming president, Jack Oman, came over and he asked me if I would be the vice president, and I immediately said no. And all week he kept just hammering at me, like, "You're going to be my vice president, right?" "No, no, Jack, I'm done." We had our big business meeting where it's all the members in attendance at the convention, and Jack stands up and immediately says, he's going to continue as our vice president. I'm like, "No, I'm not." And it wasn't until our banquet at the end of the week where I may have had some intoxicating substances,
Okay.
where I got put on the
You
spot,
were in.
and he's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah," and he's like, "You're going to be our vice president, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure,
You're picking up the tab, right, Jack? Sure.
right, yeah."
Oh, that's great. And so when you have these conversations, because again, I feel like I'm on the outside looking in, and it's always been an intriguing group that personally I just haven't joined, but very well might. Uh, what
You
are those
absolutely should.
conversations? Yeah, no, I talked to Monty Wolverton and had a great conversation with him, and he was expressing the need for new, fresh people to come in and join. But I'm curious, when you are sitting there having those conversations, what do you all kind of ruminate on with the idea of what's the future of this industry and what's the future of this person?
I mean, those conversations, like kind of like ours, can just like spiral on for a while
Yeah.
because we are speaking the same language. So there's a lot of BSing that we're gonna do. But when you kind of get down to it, it's very much recognizing that we're at this sort of this crucial point in history, not just editorial cartooning, but in history in general, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out, how do you take this very old profession and make it exciting, get people who are in positions of power and positions of publishing to remember that we're here and that we are valuable and that the voice that we bring is valuable. How do you
Hmm.
get how do you get people to pay? Because I mean, this is our profession. And
Yeah.
how do you go about recruiting new members and finding younger, more diverse people? That's that's always a challenge. And a lot of times, to be honest, we do just kind of circle the drain because there aren't any easy solutions or answers. It gets into these big philosophical discussions. Who are we? Are we a professional organization of uh, that is just here to support people who do this kind of work? Are we a journalistic organization? And you will have people in the organization saying yes we are, or and people saying no we're not. Um, should we be doing more things like being a our own publishing house or a syndicate, whatever, I mean, and these are really big questions, and unfortunately no one has the answer. So a lot of what we're trying to do right now is just make sure that we have you know the membership that we have secure, and
Yeah.
and and trying to find a way to make sure that our organization survives into the future
Mm.
while also thinking about like who do we want to bring in. So one of the things that I am getting to do is I'm the manager of the Dick Locker Award. And so this has been a long time AAEC award that's been managed by AAEC and supported by the Looker Foundation and Ohio State University. And it's been going on for more than 30 years. And the whole thing has been about finding like young cartoonists in colleges, and having a competition, and the winner gets like $1,500 and gets a trip to our convention. And it got to the point where no one was submitting, or very few people were submitting, because
Oh, wow.
there aren't that many editorial cartoonists in colleges anymore. So the previous manager put it on hold. I became a member of the board with uh, by being president. So I was already judging the competition. And early this year, the former manager reached out to me and said, "Hey, it's time for me to step down. Would you like to take over? And would you like to reconfigure the award?"
Oh,
And
wow.
again, it was just kind of like becoming president of the AAEC. I probably should have just kept saying no, but I said yes because I do feel it's very important. So we've changed it now to a fellowship, and we're
Hmm.
trying to do something a little bit different where we are going to nominate internally. It's not just for student cartoonists. We are looking professionals, anyone who's like an aspiring cartoonist who is out there, who's making work and whose work needs a boost.
Yeah.
So, they're still going to get the award money, but that award money now is actually compensation because they're going to be having a 1-year syndication deal with Counterpoint, which is a small syndicate made up of editorial cartoonists like Nick Anderson, Kevin
Oh,
Gallagher,
yeah.
Tim Campbell. And so our first fellow, Alexandra Bowman, who has been, I really think she's going to take over the world at some point. I mean, she is just so talented and intelligent, and um, I mean, I hope she doesn't hear this, but I do. I think she's either going to become like this amazing satirical talent and voice, or she's going to find a way to like just like rule the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, she's just that smart and that and great. And I was the one who went out and I was like, she has to be our first person
Mm.
because she was already a known quantity within the AAEC. She had already worked for the Lincoln Project in 2020, as a college student doing editorial cartoons for them on a national platform. And I
Wow.
wanted someone who could really step up and not just be a young cartoonist that we're giving an award to, but a partner in this process of eventually finding new people to bring into the fold and to be our
Yes.
vanguard with this program. So it's in one sense it's very ad hoc because I'm making it up as we go along, and I've kind of got carte blanche to do whatever I want with it. But on the other hand, I'm trying to be very respectful with the history of the award, being very forward thinking and trying just to figure out like how do we engage younger up and coming people who have opinions and share those opinions through art.
No, in congrats to you for doing that. I think that's again being the keeper of the flame. What was it about Alexander then, or Alexandra, that was she even aware of I want to call it like a crucial turning point of our profession? Was she aware of that, or was she just thinking, "Oh, I'm doing this for the Lincoln Project. Oh, there's the AAEC." Like, was she just on board for it, or does she see, "Oh, wow, this is a crucial point in time for this industry," and she had that kind of genetic makeup of, "No, you're just what we need to celebrate, reward, and kind of, I'll say, hold up as like, this is what we need to do moving forward." Like, I would love to hear her perspective on winning the fellowship, but where she was at, like, mentally.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for where she is mentally. Well, I know what she was telling me, which was she was actually thinking about giving up
Oh, wow. Okay.
when I sent her a message, and and I can understand that because who's going to hire a young 20-something out of college to do editorial cartoons? I mean, and she had done the Lincoln cartoons or the Lincoln Project cartoons, but yeah, I mean, she was struggling trying to find a regular gig with this. She was doing art. She still does like art tutoring for for kids, and um, and she had been a finalist for years with the previous iteration of the Looker Award.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why we did not award her this was because she was overqualified. She was already working. She was already making a name for herself. And there were a few other people who were kind of in that sort of stratosphere right there. So we were trying to find different people who weren't as active with us, who we could try to get into the fold, who really needed that boost. Now that we've changed course, she was really the only person that I had in mind.
Yeah.
Well, I no, I take that back. There were a few other people in mind, but she was the one that just kind of like really did rise to the crop, to the cream of the crop, because I knew her work. I was familiar with her. I knew her energy. I knew how she thought, and she was just the perfect person to, to really at the start of this new journey. And so, I've already told her that once her fellowship ends next May, she will be, sort of like the fellow emeritus, and she's going to be in charge of helping find that next person, and helping me, really reach out to colleges, to to try to find a network of younger up and coming people in their teens, 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s. I mean, there are people out there who are who are getting inspired and getting angry and getting worried and putting all of that into their work. There's a guy, John Buss, who is older than us, but he got an iPad and he started doing these cartoons, and he does these amazingly, very almost European style, like biting cartoons.
Wow. Okay.
That that are that are great, and he just puts it out on social media. And that's what he does. I mean, he's not getting paid for it, but he's putting it out there on social media, and he's built an audience. And it's been great watching his evolution. And I mean, and he's become one of my favorite cartoonists. I mean, he says things that I wish I could say. I wish I had the balls to say the things that he says in his cartoons. I love it.
It's almost funny when you have people, then that's such a good point. When you have people who maybe aren't, I don't even say mentored, but grew up on the diet of what you and I grew up with, and like previous generations of editorial cartoonists, of the unspoken rules, we can't really do that, we can't really say this, you can't really ever do that. But this new mindset that's out there, like the John Buss, of someone who, hey, I just got something, I'm angry, or I've got a point of view, and this is my medium to get it out. I don't care. There's no editor to bounce it off of. There's no, oh, I could lose my job for doing it. There's a great freedom in that I think sometimes, I'll say personally, that, when I have a cartoon idea and it's like, let's change this. And luckily I've been given a ton of freedom, so this rarely happens. But if I've had those moments in the past where you have something, you want to get it out, and then you're like, ooh, yeah, I could probably ruffle a few feathers, and you don't do it, or you do it, and you take the consequences with it. But someone who just has that ultimate freedom to create and without consequences, if you will, of just getting it out there and letting it live all by itself.
Yeah, it's very gratifying to watch those people work. And I do wish that we were more European. I do wish we were more British in our sensibilities when it comes to cartooning. I'm completely blanking on which British cartoonist it was, but there was one who was giving a talk at the AAEC several years ago. He was showing just a bunch of his work and other British cartoonists' work, and it was so brutal. The one that like really comes to mind is, I think it was like Tony Blair standing in a toilet and with just fecal matter everywhere, and it broke my brain because I was like, I can't imagine ever doing this. Like the term, oh, this is a family publication, like popped into my head. You can't do that. It's a family publication. And so I remember asking him, like, why are British cartoonists able to do this and American cartoonists not? And he said, it's because you're a bunch of effing Puritans. But I mean, he said the whole word, and this is a family podcast, so I'm not going to say it.
It's a family podcast. Yeah, no, but there does seem to be, like maybe our upbringing and who we are as Americans, where yes, we're we're rebellious, but there still is that maybe Puritan thread that runs through the heart of all of our publications. Man, oh, that's brilliant. I agree, because I think, I feel like there's a certain freedom, not only from a messaging standpoint, but it's funny you said this, because two of my most influential cartoonists who I think have gotten me the most outside of the political realm are Ralph Steadman and Ronald Searle. And both those guys are, kind of cut from the same cloth, but the things they even got away with back in the 70s or 60s with their art, and even today with Ralph Steadman, like from a visual standpoint, there's a freedom in almost a mercenary style from how they treat the canvas that's so, I don't want to call it hard to find, but it's so liberating once you see their work and you kind of riff in that same world. And you're like, wow, there's something nice about just throwing the paint on throwing the ink down and breaking a tip if I'm going to.
Yeah, the splatters that especially like Stedman. And there's that freedom, that the fearlessness of getting that down on that canvas and not caring if there's a big blotch of ink somewhere. It's just like letting your id just go. And so like as much as I've talked about how lucky I was growing up here in Cincinnati, which is like the most Midwestern town ever, and having Jim Borgman as my influence, I think there are some drawbacks, because I've whether it's just in my DNA or whether it's something that I've learned, I have pulled back, because I think like, okay, I am cartooning for this community, and I know what the sensibilities are here, and if I go too far, that's not good for me professionally. It might be good for me creatively, but you mix all of those things into it, and man, I wish I had that freedom like Ralph Steadman. I wish I had the freedom of John Buss. I wish I could, like, do you know, are you familiar with Clay Jones?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was my last guest on the podcast. So yeah, let's talk about freedom and yeah.
Yeah, he's insane.
He's insane. He's a good kind of insane. He's just the right amount of wrong, and I love him for it.
He is. And I mean, like I go back and forth with him, and we're I respect the hell out of him and his work ethic, and just his view of, screw it, I'm just going to draw what I want to draw, and if one of my clients wants it, they're going to buy it, and if they don't, they don't. It's not stopping him, and I just respect the hell out of him.
No, it does. He does have that renegade style to him, where you're right. So when I did speak with him, that was part of the process of all the places he's worked, and just keep within the lines, stay within the lines. And now that he's more of a freelancer, he does some work for CNN. Yes, there are things that are modified for television. For the most part, what he lays down on a daily basis, and I think he's up at the RNC this week, because I know we were talking about that. there does seem to be a sense of just unabashed freedom that it's hard to find, but I think it's beautiful in its own right when you don't have to answer to anyone but yourself. I work in the world of advertising, and one of the brands that I always admired was Liquid Death. And one of the guys worked in Boulder, just up the road from us. And they came back recently and did a little advertising day here in Colorado. But for Liquid Death, and if you've ever seen it, very crass. They do what they want. It's canned water, and it's, beautiful in that bit. It's all about saving plastic. But they had these 4 rules when they come up with a commercial or they come up with a partnership. I wrote them down. I keep them with me. It's like, what's the dumbest thing we could do? So they ask themselves that. What would a real brand do? So again, like a Perrier or Fuji Water or whatever. What would they do? Who would make no sense to work with? So that's one of the things, like Tony Hawk, where they got blood from Tony Hawk and put it in, a skateboard and gave it out. So it had his DNA in it. What's something only we could do as Liquid Death? And what are we thinking about that the same way other brands are thinking about? And why are we thinking that way? So all that is to say, they do such a great job of like being really intentional when they start off with a blank piece of paper, whether it's a TV spot or whatever they're doing. And they try to figure out how they can break conventions. And I think maybe that's kind of circling back to this conversation of John Buss, Edmund Jones, is breaking those conventions that we think we have to play within because we've always done it this way. I think it's a healthy move. And maybe this is just me riffing. Maybe that will kind of help propel this job and this avocation of being an editorial or political cartoonist, is breaking down some of those walls that have kind of confined us over the last 10, 15 years.
I think that's a very astute way of looking at it. And I think one of the biggest walls that we have is that we're still very much tied to the idea of we have to be with a newspaper. We have to be with a publication. Mm-hmm. We do live in this world of like Patreon and, crowdsourcing and finding other ways of making a living with this work. But I think we're very much tied to this as like, this needs to be like a 9-to-5 profession when it really doesn't. I mean, I even fall back into that. Back in 22, when I was president of the AAEC, we brought in Keith Knight as our keynote speaker, and he gave this amazing talk. And the thing that that really stood out to me was he said that newspapers left cartoonists behind a long time ago. It's time that we adopted the same mentality with newspapers. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that the Colorado Sun shouldn't have cartoonists, or any newspaper or any publication shouldn't have cartoonists, that we shouldn't aspire to that. But it's that we shouldn't be beholden to just that one narrow idea. If you do want to work the news media, I mean, there's NPR has hired cartoonists. I was the editorial cartoonist and comics journalist for a local TV station for 5 years. There are ways to do it. There are channels, and I think we need to be thinking about how do we get our work out there, how do we brand ourselves, and then how do we support each other. And that's actually one of the reasons why I do enjoy being a part of the AAEC, is I get to support other people. So I mean, I'm gonna just brag on myself for a minute.
Go for it.
He draws on the iPad, and the brush that he uses is called the Kevin Necessary, because he came to me. He's like, I need help with Procreate on my iPad. I don't know how to make a brush that looks like the brush that I've been using, and so I got my iPad out and I put up one of his cartoons. And I just experimented until I made a brush that looked like what he would use.
Yeah, that's so great.
So I mean, like I'm his IT guy, even though I know nothing about any of this.
And I love that he's just out there right now. He's probably sitting right now on his iPad using his Kevin Necessary brush doing something that's anti-Trump.
But I get to support a friend. I get to support a colleague, and to
Yeah.
me that's very important. It's the same thing with Alex, who, by the way, Clay is also one of her biggest supporters, and they get together all the time.
Oh,
He was actually
nice.
this is the first person I told when I decided that I wanted her to be the fellow, and he had to like keep that to himself for a little while. But I mean, we should be supporting each other. Um,
Yeah,
and
totally agree.
and finding new people to bring in and support. So I love that about doing this work.
Well, that's great, man. I applaud you for what you do. It obviously reluctant leader, and that's always a good sign. If you're willing to say no, I'd much rather trust someone like you who would say, no, I don't want to be the president, or I don't want to be the vice president. I don't want to do that. Because I think there is a sense of macho bravo, hey, hold my beer, I got this, that could almost submarine what's great about the AAEC is, hey, it's a great tribe. We're trying to reinvent ourselves, but bringing in someone like you who has a great understanding and history of the past, of where political cartoons have been, and kind of this zenith time we've lived in when we were younger, the 70s and 80s and 90s, to where we are today and where it's going. I mean, you definitely have a good understanding or a good sense or hunch of, wow, this is changing. I should figure out new ways. So it's great that you have that sense of humility and purpose behind it to really help serve and bring value to others in this tribe of people.
And there's, I mean, in my estimation, there are so many better people to do this. I mean, we have, and I've gotten to meet so many just talented, smart, thoughtful people who are all invested in what we do and moving us forward. There's a guy named John Octor up in Michigan who does cartoons for NPR, for Michigan Public Radio, and I mean, just just talking with him, he's such a nice, gentle guy. Who's got these great cartoons, and and he's doing all these great local pieces. And he's it's great knowing him and getting him invested. Mark Murphy, I don't know if you've heard about him. He's in Louisville,
Oh,
Kentucky. Possibly the smartest person you'll ever meet. I mean, he's an attorney,
okay.
and he's so cool. Like, because he's an attorney, he dresses just so nicely, and but also just like cool. Like he'll wear like black jeans and a black T-shirt, and just like, man, that's friggin' awesome. Um, but then you'll see him like in a full suit, and when he's just got this southern drawl that like everything sounds very easy to him, and he likes his bourbon, and he will just suck you in on in these amazing intellectual conversations and topics, and he gives speeches out on the steps of the Kentucky Capitol building. People like Antonius, who just has such a history with cartooning, and is just completely fearless, and especially being a woman in what is very typically a man's world,
Yeah.
and being this leader, and and just having this fearlessness, in terms of not just speaking our mind, but also knowing the history behind what we do as a profession. It's such a treat for me to be able to talk to these people and interact with these people and call them my friends and my colleagues. And it's great. I highly encourage you and all the other cartoonists that you work with to
Yeah.
to sign up. That's my recruitment speech.
No, I love it because I think, again, on this journey I've been going on this past year, I've been, one who's had one foot in, one foot out, where I'm like, oh, I do this. I don't want to even say hobby because I still care. I draw when I'm not even doing cartoons for the Sun. But having another profession, it's like, yeah, I do this too. And I think what I've uncovered here is the passion and the vitality of this small tribe of people and how important it is. And again, that waking up at the beginning of the year going, wow, this is going to be a big year politically. Man, what cartoonists are going to do what this year? That's really exciting to me. And to see it starting to unfold and to see all the different people who throw their hats in, I don't know, that it's made me love this community of people even more. And it's made me realize, like, wow, this is a really important thing. And I'm glad there's other like-minded people who are all moving the same way. So by all means, yes, I'm sold. I'll
Yeah.
join. No, and I'll put
And
some notes in there too about where to sign up at the AAEC and what that looks like in the show notes for sure.
so
Yeah.
let me ask you this. So you say that you work in the advertising world. What do you do when you aren't doing editorial cartoons?
Yeah, I am an executive creative director at a ad agency here in Denver, and I've been a a creative director and a copywriter for the last 25 years. But it was the same thing. I remember just trying to break in, getting syndicated. I would send sample packs out to everyone. I was still doing my weekly for the Aurora Sentinel at the time. It was tough paying the bills with just being a cartoonist. And as you know, the syndication business and being a syndicated cartoonist was the rarest of rare because all they wanted was, it seems like, the Garfields or the Farsides, and then like re-upping and getting a new cartoonist and a new writer team. So those kind of staples weren't going anywhere. So it was like one seat a year between the 10 syndicates. So I had a friend, I went to art school. I had a friend who got a job as an art director at an ad agency. He told me, oh, there's an internship coming up. And I had had a couple internships before, but it was a great way to meld the same process of blank piece of paper. I've got to solve a problem for a client. I got to express part of me in this process. And 9 times out of 10, it would be a little sketch of, well, this is the problem. Here's the TV script, or here's this, and to draw it out and then write it out. It felt very liberating. And for the last 20 plus years, it definitely has complemented the political cartoons I do, in the sense of solving problems, expressing myself. And it is a numbers game. And when it comes to process, I know you know this. If you want to be, you have to be prolific. You have to get a lot out to get to that one idea. And especially in advertising, it is a numbers game as well. If you want to create great work, it is putting 100 ideas down to get maybe the 10, to show the 3, to go to the 1 that the client may or may not like, that you got to change. So that, I think, kept my act sharp while I do my political cartoons. And so, yeah, long way around. That's what I do when I'm not doing political cartoons.
I can't even begin to tell you or count the number of Tide commercials or Febreze commercials, Olay body wash commercials that I've storyboarded.
Yeah.
And it's it's okay. Here's a script, or not even a script. Here's a bare bones outline for a commercial. We know we want to get from here, point A to point C. We have no idea what point B is.
Yeah.
Here are the artists. Come up,
solve this for us.
And
yeah.
solve it. Yeah.
No, I saw that on your website, and bravo to you, because that is a tough job of doing those storyboards. And over my career, it's kind of the same thing. We had a storyboard artist at one of my very first jobs where we were working for Ford, and it was writing scripts. And then it's like, great, this script got moved, let's go storyboard it so we can present it. And having the storyboard artist and sitting with him, and what if it goes to this, but it is, that alone is a very much a lost art sometimes too, of solving problems from a commercial standpoint. Yeah. And bravo to you, because you have to think through, wait a minute, if I got to go to D, what about B and C? I think they should actually be C and B, because that doesn't make sense. And if we go in, push in, then camera move wise, I don't like doing a swipe. So what you do is a very challenging task for that too.
It's a, but it,
now, do you still do that a lot, or
less so since the pandemic, just because,
okay,
productions have kind of like fallen off. And then, with the writer strike last year, that also caused a lot of things to just get backed up in the pipeline. And so, Cincinnati used to be a really big, we still are a big advertising town because we have a lot of Fortune 500 companies. But with storyboards, unfortunately, the bottom kind of fell out. I still do it occasionally when something comes up. So the last thing that I did was a series of Fireball commercials for Fireball whiskey that aired during the Super Bowl.
Oh, nice! That's great.
So they were like they didn't air during the Super Bowl. They aired around it. They were Instagram stories, but they were commercials done in the style of Instagram stories, which was that was a very interesting assignment, because they were filming three different former football players, but they only wanted one set of storyboards that all three could follow. And so
Oh,
everything had to be very generic. Everything was being drawn
yeah.
as if it was, vertical video instead of horizontal.
Yeah.
It was that was kind of a wild assignment, but it was a lot of fun. And it's it's like, as you said, it's problem solving, and I enjoy doing
Yeah.
problem solving. And I feel that way with editorial cartoons. I mean, you have an idea you want to express. Well, how do you want to express it? What are the metaphors you're going to be bringing in? Does the metaphor fit with the layout and the composition that you want to have,
Mm.
so that everything reads perfectly left to right? Or because you don't want people to be looking at a boring piece of artwork. It's all problem
Yeah.
solving. So many times, like you were saying, I'll sit down with my sketchbook and I will, you know, um, you know, just go through thumbnail after thumbnail after thumbnail, just trying to get a composition down to see what works, what doesn't, before even getting into the dialogue that I want to have, or
Yeah.
what the caricature is going to look like. It's all problem solving. It's getting those hundreds of ideas out before getting that one good, you know, hopefully good
Uh,
piece.
Yeah, exactly. And staying away from the tropes or the things that everyone does. And I think that's one thing I definitely feel like having one foot in, one foot out, where if we see, the big thing for advertising is Super Bowl commercials, like you just mentioned, or we have a thing called the Cannes Lions, which is like an international award in France, where all the big ideas and the big, big ta-das of the year. You see how it's easy to fall into the same tropes, or the same, like, oh, we'll just get a celebrity to fix this, or we'll just get that one song that used to be really popular, and we'll just put it, we'll put that in the background, and we'll just cut to different burger shots. And it's easy to fall into those things, because I think the content, whether it's a cartoon or a commercial, is becoming easier and easier, and becoming a little bit more democratized to
Mhm.
create. And I think when people just see a final product and they're like, oh, that's great, like, I don't care what it costs, and it's cheap and it's done, let's get it out there. That's where I feel like the idea, and what you're saying is like, no, it's the idea, it's the craft, it's the process of the composition, the wording, the face, how many times you redraw the nose. It's all those like little details that you can't give up on, because that's what makes it fun. It's the hunt of trying to solve it on the piece of paper or solve it on the iPad to get it done.
Yeah, and
Oh man.
I look at it at what I do. I use baseball terms, and this is actually one of the funniest things that happened to me when doing an interview with Borgman just a few years ago, as part of his. I think it was like the 30th anniversary of his Pulitzer, and I interviewed him and he started talking about cartooning in terms of baseball, and so did I. And I think that's just because of where we both grew up, and the influences that we both shared. But
Yeah.
I look at it as like, if you know if I have a 300 batting average, that means that I've been up to the plate 10 times, and three cartoons are good. You know,
Yeah.
but that's still pretty good. I mean, that's better
Yeah.
than most. And I'm happy with that. And yeah, I mean, it is. It's about the craft, but it's also accepting that what, sometimes I'm going to fall into the tropes. Sometimes I'm just going to have a bad day. Sometimes
Yeah.
the caricature is not going to work out. Sometimes the idea is so complex or obscure, or the topic is so hard to capture, that I'm going to fall back onto, like, the cartoons that I hate drawing the most are the ones where someone is watching, a news report on TV. That's like my pet peeve.
Sitting on the
And I've
couch.
seen that, yeah, sitting on the couch. We,
Yeah.
you know exactly
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I've fallen
Um,
into it. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
we all do. Even a couple
Yeah.
months ago,
Yes.
um, so with my cartoon that I do, there's a guy named David Pepper, who's the former Ohio Democratic chair. He does a daily Substack, and on Tuesdays I do a cartoon for him. And for paid subscribers, I write a behind the scenes piece about my previous week's cartoon, and I did a like I and I always show like my rough sketches and the unused ideas for that cart. One of my rough sketches for the previous week had been someone sitting around watching on the couch watching the TV, and I just ranted about how much I hate drawing those cartoons and how horrible this is, just like the cheapest trope. The very next week, what kind of cartoon did I publish? Someone sitting, someone sitting and watching the news.
I had it just this week. Yeah, I had the same thing. A little sketch. I was like, oh, the TV is this, and maybe the person is not sitting on the couch. They're on their phone looking on. I'm like, no, it's still that. How do I break away from it? How do I break away from it? Yeah. No, it goes back to, gosh, Lorne Michaels. He had a great quote, because we live in the world of deadlines, of like, oh, it's got to get up, or in the advertising world. One of my favorite quotes from him is, the show doesn't go on because it's ready. The show goes on because it's 10:30. And sometimes it is like, we grab anything we can. We try to get it as good as we can to get it out. And you're right. If I'm batting 300, it's almost like giving yourself permission of like, yep, I'm going to have some bad swings, some things I shouldn't have, even looked at. I might even get hit by a pitch some weeks, and I'm lucky and I get on base. But you're right. I think that keeping it in perspective of being a 300 hitter is not a bad thing in this world.
Absolutely.
Oh man. Well, I want to be cognitive, because I know you're not 100%. So, any final thoughts? Where can everyone find your work, and anything else you want to kind of wrap up with about what it's like being an editorial cartoonist? Like, if you could make a pitch to that young college kid who's thinking, oh, maybe I could join the Nebraska newspaper here in Nebraska, or what would you say to him or her to make a pitch to be a political cartoonist?
I'd say to me, it's one of the most honest ways that I can express myself. I can do this. I can talk to someone, or I can give a talk, and I can feel like I express myself well, but I almost feel like I have like a limited ability to do that, or like a limited like reservoir of that kind of skill to talk to someone coherently. But when I do a cartoon, I'm oftentimes that's where I'm able to like really get what I want to say onto paper, or I want to get what I want to say out. And you don't need to have an institution behind you. We have social media, we have the internet, we have so many different platforms that anyone can put their work out onto and get those opinions out. I would say, for if you want to be in this profession, understand what you're drawing. Understand the topics that you're drawing. That's why I went to journalism school instead of art school. I wanted to understand the news before I drew the news.
Yeah.
And there's a big responsibility to that. Because you don't want to just be falling into, unfounded opinions. You want to be able to back up your opinion with facts. And to me, that's more important than knowing how to draw well. If you can scribble something down, but have it be coherent, have it be clear, have a real message behind it, hopefully be funny and inviting, that to me is more important than being able to draw like Michelangelo, or that's the most important thing. And I feel like with as connected as we are, with as much information that's out there, younger people have all that at their fingertips all the time. And I want to encourage people to not just younger people, but anyone who wants to pick up a pencil and get their thoughts out there, and not just their thoughts, but well-intentioned, well-informed, well-crafted opinion. Anyone can do that.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great. And I have to say, meeting you, talking with you, I know we've been back and forth, that we finally made this work. So thank you. I have to say, I haven't met too many people with your kind of dedication to the craft of just, yes, the final product, but not only to the craft, but to the industry. And I got to say, it's really refreshing. I think you've kind of re-inspired me of where this whole thing's going and what the possibilities of what this thing is. So thank you for your work behind the scenes at the AAC, your late nights at your board. It's really good to see, because I think it's kind of fanned the flames in me a bit to go, wow, what am I doing? Kevin's crushing it. But you have such a humble approach and you have such a dedication and a care that it's rare to find. So again, great to see. And thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, thank you for having me.